Tonight, before scissors become a thing so ordinary that they vanish into a drawer, you enter a small workshop where every pair begins as stubborn metal and patient hands. The room is low, warm, and smoky in the way old working rooms often are, with a charcoal fire breathing in the corner and long shadows lying across the bench. There is no factory rhythm here, no stamped-out sameness, no neat row of identical handles arriving from a machine. There is only a smith, a grinder, a filer, perhaps an apprentice trying not to drop anything expensive, and the quiet knowledge that two blades must learn to move as one. If you enjoy slow, quiet histories like this, feel free to subscribe to Night Pages, and like the video so more calm stories can find their way to sleepy listeners. Now, let the little workshop settle around you. Outside, cloth merchants, tailors, sheep shearers, barbers, midwives, cooks, and household women all have reasons to want a clean cut. A knife can slice, but a knife is lonely. Scissors are a small argument solved by balance. Two edges, one pivot, two bows for the fingers, and just enough spring in the hand to make work feel possible. They are intimate tools, held close to the body, opened and closed thousands of times, often by people whose names never entered a ledger. Before factories, making them was not one invention, but a chain of careful compromises. The steel must be hard enough to hold an edge, yet not so brittle that the tip snaps. The bows must be broad enough for fingers, yet not waste too much metal. The pivot must be tight enough for the blades to meet, yet loose enough to move without chewing itself apart. Every tiny decision waits for the next one. A bad hammer blow can become a crooked shank. A hurried file stroke can become a gap that catches thread instead of cutting it. So we begin slowly, with the ordinary miracle of a pair of shears. They look simple only because so many earlier hands have hidden the difficulty from view. The first thing you notice is how many motions must happen before the first useful cut exists. Someone must carry fuel, sort charcoal, clear yesterday's ash, and place the small bars where they can be reached without searching. Someone must check the hammer faces, because a nicked hammer can stamp a flaw into hot metal as surely as a seal stamps wax. The anvil has its familiar bright places, polished by work, and its darker corners where scale gathers like old pepper. A pair of scissors may later rest beside lace or paper with an air of gentility, but its birth is practical and bodily. Sleeves are rolled, backs bend, fingers test heat from a cautious distance. The maker knows that a tool made for delicate cutting can begin in a room where everything is soot, weight, and risk. That contrast is part of the charm. The gentlest snip may have started as a bar reluctant to move under a hammer. The old room also asks you to slow your sense of invention. Scissors did not arrive as one sudden clever idea and then remain unchanged. They gathered improvements: better steel, better pivots, better grinding, better handles, better ways to repeat a successful shape. Each improvement was small enough to be missed by anyone not doing the work, yet together they turned a difficult little mechanism into something a tired hand could trust without thinking. The first matter is not the blade, but the material that might someday become one. In the older workshop, steel is not an anonymous bar from a catalog. It arrives with history. Blister steel from a cementation furnace, shear steel folded and worked. Small rods bought dear from a merchant, scrap saved from a broken tool, or iron that still needs a harder face welded where the cutting edge will live. The smith studies it with the suspicion of someone who has been disappointed before. A good pair of scissors asks for more than hardness. Too soft, and the edges roll over like tired pastry. Too hard, and the tips chip when they meet a stubborn seam or a bit of grit hidden in cloth. Steel in this period can be uneven from end to end, richer in carbon in one place and poorer in another. The maker has to read color, fracture, spark, sound, and memory. He may strike a small test piece, snap it, inspect the grain, and pretend he is not worried about the cost. On a shelf there are old failures, a blade warped during hardening, a bow cracked while being opened, a pivot hole that drifted off center. They are not useless. They teach. They become wedges, scrapers, small shop tools, or warnings. In a world where metal has been mined, smelted, traded, taxed, and hauled before it ever reaches the bench, waste feels almost rude. The apprentice learns to sort bars by thickness and promise. Heavy shears for cloth or sheep require different stock from delicate household scissors. Tailors may want long blades that glide across fabric. Embroiderers may want short, sharp points that can nip thread. Barbers need smooth action near skin, where a rough pivot is not a charming historical detail, but an excellent way to lose customers. Before the fire is lit for forging, the maker is already imagining the finished movement. He is seeing one blade crossing the other, the finger bows aligned, the tips meeting in a quiet kiss of steel. The raw material does not yet resemble scissors, but the problem has already begun. In some regions, the steel itself carries the reputation of distant places. A maker may prefer stock from a town known for cutlery, or from a merchant whose goods have disappointed him less often than others. That is not the same as certainty. Pre-industrial material quality can vary enough that experience becomes a form of insurance. The smith learns which bars spark lively, which fracture with a fine grain, which seem promising but become treacherous under the file. Even the choice between making large shears and fine scissors affects the first cut of stock. A long tailor's blade asks for straighter, cleaner material. A stout pair for rough work may tolerate heavier sections, but still needs a reliable edge. The maker is not only choosing metal, he is choosing how much risk to accept, how much labor he can spend, and which future customer he is trying to satisfy before that customer has even entered the shop. The maker may keep separate pieces for experiments, because material knowledge grows from controlled disappointment. A strip that seems too inconsistent for fine scissors might become a shop scraper. A better piece is reserved for a customer who pays for quality. This sorting is not greed. It is matching. In a world without perfect uniform stock, using the right metal for the right tool is one of the first forms of craftsmanship. Once the steel has been chosen, the forge becomes the center of the day. Charcoal glows under a skin of ash. The bellows sigh, and the bar slowly gives up its cold refusal. The smith does not simply heat metal until it is bright, and then attack it. He waits for the right color, a living orange or yellow depending on the steel and the work. Because old steel can forgive many things, but not careless heat. A scissor blade starts as a small shape coaxed out of a larger one. The smith draws the metal thinner toward the future cutting edge, leaves strength where the shank will carry the pivot, and begins to define the shoulder where blade becomes handle. Each hammer blow spreads material in several directions at once. Strike too hard near the tip, and it grows thin and weak. Strike too timidly, and the piece remains lumpy, demanding endless filing later. The best work looks calm because the worst decisions have been avoided. For simple shears, blade and shank may be forged as a single piece. For more refined scissors, the finger bows require extra shaping, welding, or careful bending from drawn-out metal. The smith must think in mirror images. One half is not enough. A pair needs two similar but opposite lives, and they must agree when joined. If one blade curves a little more than the other, if one shank twists, if one bow sits proud, the final tool will gossip about the error every time it opens. The shop is full of small measuring habits. A line scratched with a scribe. A thumb laid across a hot piece before the heat reaches the skin. A comparison against an older pair hanging by the bench. There may be patterns, but much is still carried in the body. The maker knows how long a tailor's blade should feel, how stout a sheep shear must be, how narrow an embroidery point can become before it turns treacherous. When the first forged blanks cool to black, they do not yet cut anything. They are rough, scaled, and a little ugly. But the future has become visible. Two slender promises lying on the anvil, waiting to be made exact. Forging also teaches the maker to leave enough metal for the operations that follow. Modern eyes may expect a forged blank to look nearly finished, but old work often moves in stages of allowance. The file will need something to remove. The grinder will need material to true. The hardening may move the blade slightly, and the final fitting may ask for correction. If the smith makes the blank too elegant too early, later craftsmen have no room to rescue it. The heat itself has moods. A fire that is too oxidizing eats the surface. A distracted apprentice at the bellows can cool the work at the wrong moment, or bring it too hot. The smith may say little, but the rhythm of his hammer changes when things are going well. Quicker drawing blows, lighter finishing taps, a pause for inspection. The blank is not forced into being all at once. It is negotiated out of the bar. There is a moral patience in forging small things. Large ironwork announces itself with weight and noise, but a scissor blank can be spoiled by excess confidence. The smith must make force precise. He must know when a blow should spread, when it should lengthen, and when the hammer should stop before pride ruins the shape. Small tools teach restraint more sternly than large ones. The bows, those quiet loops for the fingers, are among the most human parts of scissors. A blade can be judged by its edge, but a handle is judged by the ache it leaves behind. Before factories, comfort is not calculated by a design department. It is discovered by makers who have watched tailors work until their knuckles stiffen, or sheep shearers open, and close heavy blades until the hand feels made of rope. To form a bow, metal may be drawn into a narrow stem and curved around a small mandrel, then welded, refined, and filed. In cheaper or heavier work, the shape can be plain and blunt, just enough opening for finger and thumb. In finer work, the loops become graceful, almost decorative. But grace still has to survive use. A beautiful bow that bites the hand is not beautiful for very long. The smith heats the shank end and eases it around iron forms. The bend must not tear. The loop must not close unevenly. If a weld is needed, the scarfed ends are cleaned, fluxed, brought to heat, and struck together with that tense little faith every forge weld requires. A poor weld may hide until the customer has used the tool for a week, which is an inconvenient time for honesty to emerge. The apprentice files away scale and sharp ridges. This is not glamorous work. It is exactly the kind of work that makes a tool feel inevitable later. The inside of the bow must be smooth enough not to scrape the skin. The outer curves must not catch on sleeves or thread. Tiny burrs are hunted down. The hand passes over the metal again and again because fingers notice what eyes excuse. There is also proportion. Large bows on small blades make the scissors clumsy. Small bows on long shears make the hand fight the tool. The maker is balancing bodies, the metal body of the scissors and the living body that will use them. In that quiet negotiation, the everyday object becomes personal. The finger bows also reveal the social life of the tool. A wealthy customer might want more refined curves, perhaps a cleaner finish or a more elegant outline. A working tailor wants reliability first, though a comfortable shape is no luxury when a hand repeats the same motion all day. A household pair may be used by several people, none of whose fingers quite agree on what comfort means. The maker cannot measure every future hand, so he works from common use and accumulated complaint. The inside curve is rounded because skin remembers corners. The lower bow may be shaped differently from the upper, because thumb and fingers do different work. Even a plain pear contains this small anthropology. It is metal shaped around the habits of bodies: pinching, guiding, squeezing, resting, beginning again. Comfort also affects accuracy. A painful bow makes the user squeeze awkwardly. An awkward squeezing changes the cut. The maker may never use the scissors for hours of sewing, but he has to imagine the person who will. A tool is not finished when it merely survives the bench. It is finished when it can enter another person's routine without becoming a daily complaint. After the hammering, the filing begins, and the workshop changes its sound. The fire still mutters, but now the sharper voice is steel against steel, a long dry rasp that seems to measure time by patience rather than by hours. Forged blanks are never as neat as the finished tool suggests. They carry scale, bulges, uneven shoulders, and proud little mistakes left by the hammer. The file is where many of those mistakes are either corrected or made permanent. A scissor maker uses files of different cuts and shapes. Flat files for broad surfaces, half-round files for inner curves, narrow files for shoulders, and around the future pivot. Each stroke removes a small certainty. Too little, and the blade remains heavy and awkward. Too much, and the maker has paid good steel to the floor as dust. In a pre-industrial shop, metal filings gather like gray flour, and every pinch of them represents labor that had to be mined, smelted, bought, heated, struck, and then patiently abraded away. The inner faces of the blades matter most. Scissors do not cut because two knife edges float near each other. They cut because the blades pass with controlled contact, a slight crossing pressure that shears fibers between them. The faces must be shaped so they meet correctly along the cut. A blade that is flat in the wrong way can leave a gap. A blade that is too proud can bind and scrape. The tool must be persuaded into a geometry the eye may barely see, but the cloth will immediately judge. Here, the maker works by sight, touch, and a kind of mechanical imagination. He holds one half against the other. He marks a high spot with soot or chalk. He files. He checks again. The apprentice may be given the rougher work, but the final fitting belongs to the experienced hand, because filing is easy to begin and difficult to undo. By evening, the blanks have become more refined. Their rough, forge-born character has softened into intention. They still cannot cut, not properly, but they have begun to look as though someday they might. Filing is also where apprentices learn humility. A file looks simple enough until it wanders, chatters, or bites too deeply. The stroke should be steady, lifted on the return, guided by the whole arm rather than frantic fingers. The worker must keep the surface, even without losing the line established by the forge. It is slow work, but not mindless. Mindless filing is merely damage performed gradually. Light from a window or lamp helps reveal planes and ridges. The maker turns the blade, watches how brightness travels across it, and sees a bump that a beginner would miss. He may blue or darken a surface to show high spots. He may use calipers, dividers, or a simple comparison to the matching half. Every correction seems tiny. Together, they decide whether the scissors will later feel crisp or vague, honest or annoying. The file marks that remain under later polish are like handwriting. One worker presses harder. Another keeps a flatter stroke. Another rounds edges almost unconsciously. On surviving old tools, such traces can sometimes be felt more than seen. They remind us that sameness was not the default condition of objects. Before machine uniformity, even a plain pair of scissors carried the tempo of individual hands. The pivot is a small thing with a tyrant's authority. On a pair of scissors, it decides whether the blades meet, wobble, grind, spring open, or refuse to move. Before factories, there is no automatic jig guaranteeing perfect repetition. A hole must be marked, punched, or drilled, enlarged, cleaned, and aligned by someone who understands that a fraction of error can travel all the way to the tips. The maker first decides where the crossing should live. Too close to the handles, and the blades may feel weak and floppy. Too far forward, and the hand must work harder for the same cut. Heavy shears, tailoring scissors, and small household scissors each want a slightly different compromise. The pivot is leverage made visible. A center mark is pricked into the shank. The piece may be clamped or held in a small vise, then drilled with a bow drill, breast drill, or other hand-powered tool, depending on place and period. The sound is slow, circular, and faintly stubborn. Oil or grease may be used to help the bit, and the worker clears chips carefully. A broken drill in a nearly finished blade is the kind of event that makes a quiet shop suddenly very religious. If the hole is punched hot, it must still be trued. If drilled cold, it must be kept square. The two halves are compared often. One hole slightly oval, one hole slightly angled, and the future screw or rivet will sit like a bad thought in the middle of the tool. Later factories will make such alignment seem mundane. Here it is earned. The pivot itself may be a rivet, a screw, or a small threaded fastener in finer work. A rivet is simple but less adjustable. A screw can be tightened as wear develops, but it asks for more precise making. Threads, slot, head, and the little discipline of not losing it on the floor. However it is made, the pivot is not decoration. It is the hinge of trust. Everything the scissors will do must pass through that small circle. A misplaced pivot is especially cruel because it may not look terrible at first glance. The bows can still appear graceful, the blades bright, the tool nearly complete. But when opened and closed, the error reveals itself in leverage, in tip alignment, and a subtle skew that no polish can flatter. This is why careful marking feels so ceremonial. A dot from a punch becomes the center around which the whole future movement turns. The tools for making the hole deserve their own patience. A hand drill requires pressure and rhythm. A punch requires heat and support. A reamer can true the opening, but also enlarge it beyond wisdom. The maker clears burrs, checks both sides, and refuses to hurry. Around the pivot, metal must be clean, flat enough, and strong enough, because all the cutting force will return there like a debt collector. Because the pivot is so decisive, some makers develop little rituals around checking it. They may assemble the halves temporarily with a wire, open and close them, then remove it for further work. They may compare the angle to an older, reliable pair. These habits are practical superstitions, born from knowing how many ways a small hole can become a large regret. The blades now need their edges, and edge making is a slow lesson in restraint. The cutting bevel must be ground or filed along each blade with enough consistency that the two edges cooperate. A knife can forgive a certain individuality along its length. Scissors are less forgiving. Their edges do not work alone. They pass one another in a controlled crossing, and any unevenness becomes a snag, a chew, or a dull patch that leaves threads connected like tiny, stubborn bridges. Before powered grinding becomes common in large works, much of this shaping may be done with files, stones, and hand-turned wheels. Where water-powered grinding exists, it brings speed, but also danger. A wheel can overheat a thin edge, throw grit, or remove in a moment what took an hour to forge. The grinder learns to keep the blade moving, to cool it, to listen for changes in sound. Steel has many ways of complaining, but it rarely apologizes. The bevel is not made as a dramatic razor edge at first. It is established gradually. The maker leaves enough material for hardening and later finishing. A blade too thin before heat treatment may warp. Too thick, and it will become a tiring wedge. The tips receive special attention. Fine scissors must close cleanly at the very end, because thread and cloth often meet the tool there first. Heavy shears need stronger tips, less elegant perhaps, but less likely to bend under rough work. Grinding throws a smell into the room. Wet stone, hot metal, old oil, and the mineral dampness of the wheel. Fine gray slurry collects underfoot. The worker's hands become blackened in a way washing never quite defeats. The blade surfaces brighten, not yet polished, but awake. At this stage, the scissors are still only potential. The edges are shaped, but not finished. The steel not yet properly hardened. The pair not yet married at the pivot. Still, if you hold the two halves near each other, you can almost imagine the first clean whisper through cloth. The cutting bevel is also shaped with the intended user in mind. Long dressmaking shears benefit from an edge that can travel through layered cloth without wandering. Smaller scissors need nimble points and a bevel that responds to light pressure. A tool for rough fibers can be less delicate, but not crude. The edge geometry is a conversation between material and hand strength. Grinding and filing change the balance of the blade. Remove too much near the tip, and it becomes fragile. Leave too much, and it feels clumsy. The worker may weigh the half in his hand, not with a scale, but with familiarity. He knows how a finished pair should tip, how the blade should fall when the pivot is held, how mass near the handles can make the motion feel stable. These judgments rarely appear in inventories, yet they live in every pleasant cut. The edge also has to survive the person who does not know its limits. Scissors meant for cloth may meet paper, string, bark, or a bit of wire in an impatient hand. The maker cannot prevent foolish use, but he can leave enough strength that ordinary foolishness is not instantly fatal. Many tools are designed not for ideal users, but for real ones. Hardening brings anxiety back into the room. A blade that has survived forging, filing, drilling, and grinding can still be ruined in a brief meeting with heat and water. The maker heats the blade to the right color, watching the steel in the dimmest practical light, because bright daylight lies about temperature. Then comes the quench: water, brine, oil, or whatever method local practice and steel quality suggest. There is a hiss, a little violence, and then the moment of inspection. Thin scissor blades are prone to warp. One edge may pull, a tip may twist, the shank may move just enough to spoil the alignment. The maker may straighten while the metal is still warm, carefully, quickly, and with the air of someone handling a sleeping wasp. If the blade cracks, there is no speech that improves the situation. The work simply returns to the pile of lessons. After hardening, the steel is often too brittle for use, so it must be tempered. The maker polishes a small patch bright and reheats gently, watching colors bloom across the surface: pale straw, deeper gold, brown, purple, blue. Each color suggests a different temper, a different balance between hardness and toughness. For scissors, the edge wants firmness, but the tool also needs to endure opening, closing, dropping, and the occasional user who believes all tools are secretly pry bars. Tempering is one of those old skills that can sound mystical until you stand beside someone who has done it for years. It is not magic. It is attention refined into habit. The maker knows how fast color runs on a thin blade, how heat lingers near the thicker shank, how a charcoal fire behaves when stirred, how a draft from the door can change a small operation. When the pair survives hardening and tempering, the relief in the shop is modest but real. The metal has crossed from shape into tool steel. It still needs fitting, sharpening, and finishing, but it has gained the quiet strength that will let it cut for years. Tempering colors move quickly on thin steel, and that speed makes the work tense. The maker may heat from the back of the blade, or use a warmed iron plate, trying to let color creep toward the edge with control. A moment of inattention can carry the temper too far. The edge that should have been resilient becomes soft, and the earlier hardening must be reconsidered or repeated with all its risks. There is also local tradition in these choices. One shop may swear by a certain quench, another may distrust it. One maker may temper slightly softer for tools expected to suffer rough household treatment, while another seeks a keener, harder edge for fine cloth. These are not abstract debates. They are arguments paid for by broken tips, returned tools, and customers who either come back gratefully or do not come back at all. Heat treatment is one reason old makers sometimes guarded their methods closely. The temperatures are not written on a dial. They are held in color memory, in the look of the fire, in the timing between hearth and quench. A shop's practice may be ordinary to those inside it, and mysterious to those outside. Knowledge lives in repetition until someone asks where it is written and discovers it is mostly in the hands. After each blade has been hardened and tempered, the two halves must finally meet. This is the moment when the maker discovers whether all the earlier decisions have been friendly to one another. A scissor half can look respectable alone, lying on the bench like a narrow little tool in its own right. But scissors are not solitary. They are a partnership, and some partnerships begin with a great deal of scraping. The maker places the blades together at the pivot and watches the crossing. The tips may miss. The edges may rub too heavily near the base and float apart near the end. One bow may sit a little high. The shanks may twist against each other. None of this is dramatic enough for a heroic painting, but it is the actual story of the tool. A pair of scissors is a machine so small that every error is personal. The pivot pin or screw is introduced cautiously. If it is a rivet, it must be peened without crushing the movement. If it is a screw, it must be seated so the blades can be adjusted again. The maker opens and closes the pair, slowly at first. There is a gritty sound where scale or high spots remain. He takes the scissors apart, marks the offending places, files, stones, and tries again. This fitting can happen many times. It is patient work, almost domestic in its repetition. Assemble, feel, disassemble, correct, assemble, feel again. The blades must not simply touch. They must pass with a slight pressure that travels along the cut. Too loose, and cloth folds between them in humiliation. Too tight, and the user's hand tires before the work is done. At last, the pair begins to move with intention. It is not yet beautiful. The surfaces may still be dull, the edges unfinished, the screw head rough. But when the maker opens it, the two blades know each other. That small agreement is the heart of the scissors. When the two halves first come together, the maker may also learn whether they look like they belong to the same pair. Small differences are acceptable, even charming, but functional imbalance is not. If one blade is heavier, the opening feels odd. If one bow sits at a different angle, the hand notices. If the points cross badly, the tool seems to squint. The process of marrying the halves is therefore partly mechanical and partly aesthetic. A useful tool should not fight the eye too much, because buyers often judge with vision before they judge with cloth. The maker cleans the shoulders, aligns the shanks, and makes the crossing look intentional. It is small ceremony of partnership. Two pieces made separately now have to share one reputation, and neither is allowed to embarrass the other. Once paired, the scissors also acquire direction. The upper and lower blade are not interchangeable in use, and the way the hand holds them matters. Some pairs favor right-handed work. Some older forms are more neutral or simply less refined. The maker may not describe this in modern ergonomic terms, but he understands whether the tool sits naturally when lifted from the bench. In a well-made pair of scissors, the screw can feel almost like a personality. It may be modest and plain, or neatly slotted and polished. It may sit slightly proud, catching the light, or settle low into the shank. But its real character is in the movement it permits. The screw must hold the crossing together without turning the tool into a tiny iron trap. Before standardized screws are everywhere, making a good small screw is its own craft. Threads may be cut by hand with dies and taps. The head must be shaped, the slot filed, the length trimmed. A screw too soft wears quickly. A screw too badly fitted loosens with use. A slot too shallow frustrates adjustment. And if the screw is lost, the scissors become two related pieces of metal with no shared purpose. Some cheaper shears use rivets instead. They can be strong, simple, and perfectly adequate, especially for rough work. But a riveted pivot has less forgiveness as the tool wears. If it is too tight, the blades bind. If too loose, the pair chatters. The maker peens carefully, checking often, tapping with little blows that would look comical beside the earlier forging but matter just as much. A screw allows the owner or repairer to tune the action. Tailors appreciate this. So do barbers. The pivot can be tightened when the cut begins to fail or loosened if the blades drag. Yet, adjustment is not a cure for poor geometry. A screw cannot make crooked blades straight or badly ground edges faithful. It can only hold a good relationship at the right tension. The maker turns the screw, opens the scissors, closes them, listens, and turns again. A quarter turn can change everything. In that small motion, the whole tool becomes adjustable. Not because it is modern, but because old hands learned long ago that useful things must sometimes be allowed to age. The screw also creates a future relationship with maintenance. A careful owner can tighten it, but an overconfident owner can tighten it too much, forcing the blades to grind. A loose screw may be blamed on the maker, the metal, the weather, or the moon, depending on temperament. In truth, moving tools ask for occasional attention. The old screw is an invitation to adjust rather than discard. Making the slot in the screw head is a small act with large consequences. It must be straight enough to accept a tool, deep enough not to cam out, but not so deep that the head weakens. The head must not stand so proud that it catches cloth. Even this tiny part contains proportions, failures, and repairs. A scissor screw is humble, but it sits at the throne of the whole mechanism. A screw that can be adjusted also invites responsibility. Owners who value their tools learn not to force a dull pair through thick material, not to leave the pivot dry, and not to turn the screw wildly in frustration. Good tools educate their users slowly. They reward careful handling and punish neglect, not with drama, but with a steadily worsening cut. The ride of the blades is the quiet secret that separates a tool from two sharpened strips of metal. If you watch scissors close, the cutting point travels from the pivot toward the tips like a little wave. The blades do not meet everywhere at once. They meet progressively, squeezing and shearing fibers between them. Before factories, setting that ride is a matter of hand, eye, and patient testing. The maker bends and corrects with delicacy. A blade may be given a slight curve or twist so it bears against its partner. This is not careless warping. It is controlled misalignment in service of alignment. The tool must be a little alive. Completely flat blades might look tidy on the bench and fail miserably in cloth. A small spring of crossing pressure is what makes the cut continue. Correcting the ride can involve tapping, levering, stoning, and trying again. The maker may darken one face with soot, close the blades, and see where contact rubs the mark away. He may hold the pair to the light and search for gaps. He may cut a scrap of linen, then a thread, then something heavier. Each test tells a different truth. Linen reveals snagging. Wool reveals pushing. Thread reveals the tips. The hand learns the feel of a good closing motion. Smooth, slightly resistant, neither lazy nor harsh. Too much pressure near the pivot makes the scissors tiring. Too little near the tips makes them treacherous for fine work. Long tailor shears must glide through cloth laid flat on a table. Small household scissors must be forgiving in less expert hands. Sheep shears, with their broader spring forms, answer to another tradition of movement, more muscular and open. This is why old scissors often bear the marks of repeated correction. Their usefulness is not hidden in one grand operation. It is accumulated in tiny negotiations, until the blades pass each other with that calm, decisive whisper. A maker may test the ride by closing the blade slowly against the light, watching the line of contact travel. This is not a dramatic test, but it is revealing. The blades should seem to pursue one another. A gap that opens and closes in the wrong place predicts future chewing. A harsh rub predicts tired hands and rapid wear. The goal is controlled intimacy between the edges. Sometimes correction means introducing a barely visible bend that would alarm someone who believes straightness is always virtue. Tools often require such paradoxes. A plane sole must be flat. A scissor blade may need set. A spring must be flexible to be strong. The maker's knowledge is full of these practical contradictions. He does not need to explain them elegantly. He needs the cloth to part cleanly when the customer tries the tool. The ride of the blades is especially beautiful because it is almost invisible when correct. You notice it mainly when it fails. The best mechanical adjustments often disappear into ease, and that disappearance can make the maker's judgment seem less impressive than it is. A clean cut feels natural. The work required to make it feel natural is the hidden part. Sharpening scissors is not the same as sharpening a knife, though many impatient owners have tried to pretend otherwise. The edge angle, the interface, the meeting of the blades, and the pivot tension all matter together. A knife needs to be sharp along one edge. Scissors need to be sharp in relationship. Before factories, the final sharpening belongs to someone who understands that distinction in the fingers. The maker works the bevel with stone, wheel, or fine file, depending on the tool and workshop. He keeps the interface true, resisting the temptation to round it over. He removes burrs carefully. A burr left in the wrong place can make the first few cuts seem promising, and then turn the tool into a chewer of cloth. Fine scissors require particularly careful tips. The last little point must close, or the tool will fail exactly where delicate work depends on it. Sharpening can also reveal earlier sins. If one blade was ground too thin, the edge may flex. If the pivot was set badly, no amount of keenness will make the cut clean. If the ride is wrong, the sharpest edge can still push fabric aside instead of shearing it. The maker may have to return to fitting, then come back to the stone. The process is circular. not a simple march toward completion. There is a pleasant sound when a good edge is almost ready. A softer rasp, a cleaner draw, the stone whispering rather than arguing. The blade brightens along the bevel. The maker wipes it on leather or rag and holds it against the other half. Open, tight, point, close. Listen, feel, feel. Then comes the little trial that every user understands. A strip of cloth is offered to the blades. The scissors close, and the fabric parts without being dragged. No drama, just obedience. In an old workshop, that quiet, clean cut is the applause. Sharpening also carries the risk of shortening the life of the tool before it has begun. Every pass on the stone spends steel. A generous edge can survive years of later resharpening. A miserly edge may look keen in the shop and age badly. The maker is thinking not only of the first sale but of the third repair, the fifth year, the day someone brings the pair back and asks whether anything can be done. The final burr is especially important. On a knife, a user may feel for it and remove it in a familiar way. On scissors, a burr along the interface can interfere with the crossing. The maker removes it without rounding the meeting surfaces. This is delicate, almost fussy work. But fussiness is often what separates a clean tool from a merely sharp-looking one. Sharpeners also have to respect the original maker's geometry. A careless resharpening can ruin the set of the blades, change the bevel, or round the inner face until the scissors never cut properly again. This is why a skilled repairer is valuable. Maintenance is not simply repeating the first making on a smaller scale. It is preserving a relationship already built into worn metal. In towns where water power is available, the grinder's work may move from the small bench to a larger, wetter, more dangerous whirl. A water wheel turns outside or below, patient as weather, transferring the motion of a stream into the spinning of stone. The grinding room is damp, loud, and flecked with slurry. It can make work faster, but speed is not kindness unless guided by skill. The grinder may sit or crouch in a posture that looks uncomfortable because it is. He holds the blade against the rotating stone, adjusting pressure with arms, wrists, and the whole tired intelligence of the body. Too much pressure heats the steel. Too little wastes time. The blade must be presented at the correct angle, moved evenly, cooled often. Water helps, but it does not forgive everything. Grinding wheels can burst. They can catch. They can throw fragments. They can pull a tool from the hand. The old romance of craft often forgets that many crafts were performed beside hazards that did not care about romance at all. A scissor blade is small, but the wheel is not impressed by smallness. The grinder's caution is earned. For scissors, the wheel shapes bevels and refined surfaces, but the final truth still returns to fitting. A blade can leave the wheel bright and wrong. The maker or finisher must bring it back to the pair, check the crossing, remove burrs, and test the cut. In larger cutlery centers, tasks may be divided. Forging in one hand, grinding in another, finishing in another. The tool carries several people's labor, even if only one maker's mark eventually appears. The water wheel turns through all of this with calm indifference. Outside, the stream moves on. Inside, steel becomes thinner, brighter, sharper. The grinder's clothes smell of wet stone and metal. His hands know the cost of a smooth edge. Cutlery towns powered by streams often organize labor around these wheels. A grinder might not be the same person who forged the blade, and the division could produce both efficiency and dependence. If the water ran low in dry weather, production slowed. If a wheel needed repair, many hands waited. Nature remained part of the factory before the factory, turning wages and deadlines with the weather. The grinder's health was also part of the hidden cost. Grit, damp, posture, and danger lived in the room with him. The beautiful bright bevel on a finished blade could carry the price of lungs, joints, and nerves. Sleepy history need not shout about this, but it should not erase it either. Ordinary comfort often rests on uncomfortable labor performed somewhere else by someone whose name was not stamped into the steel. Water-powered grinding introduces a different kind of patience, waiting for infrastructure. The wheel, the sluice, the stone, the belts, the weather, and the landlord or guild arrangement may all stand between the worker and his wage. A pair of scissors made in such a place contains not only hand skill, but organized power, the stream outside converted into sharpened edges inside. Once the scissors can cut, they still need finishing. This is the part the customer sees first, and sometimes mistakes for the whole craft. Polishing, smoothing, shaping the bows, cleaning the screw head, softening corners, and brightening surfaces all make the tool appear complete. Yet finishing is not merely vanity. A rough surface rusts more easily, catches more dirt, and feels worse in the hand. The maker uses stones, fine files, abrasives, leather, cloth, oil, and patience. Scale left from the forge is removed. File marks are reduced, though not always erased. In many pre-industrial tools, evidence of the hand remains visible. Slight asymmetries, tiny waves, an honest unevenness along a bow. These are not necessarily defects. They are the difference between a made object and a stamped one. Fine scissors may receive more polish, perhaps even decorative shaping or simple engraving. A maker's mark might be struck into the metal, declaring origin and reputation. A good mark is a promise and an advertisement. It says, in effect, someone stands behind this pair, or at least hopes the pair behaves well enough that customers return rather than complain. Rust is an enemy waiting patiently. The finished scissors may be oiled before sale. Owners are expected to keep them dry, though homes, shops, kitchens, and ships are rarely ideal places for polished steel. A pair used near wet wool or kitchen steam needs care. A pair kept in a sewing basket among scraps may live more gently. Either way, the surface finish is a small defense against time. When polishing is done, the scissors catch light along the blades. They look simpler than they are, which is often the fate of well-made things. The long chain of heat, hammer, file, water, stone, and hand has become a quiet gleam. Finishing may include small decorative choices, but decoration is safest when it respects function. A little shaping around the bows can please the eye. A clean maker's mark can reassure the buyer. But grooves that catch dirt, fragile points, or excessive thinning can make a tool worse. The best ornament on working scissors is often restraint. Still, people have always liked useful things to have a little dignity. A polished pear in a sewing box feels different from a crude pear tossed among nails. The shine tells the owner that this object deserves care. It also tells the maker's story in a public language. Customers may not understand heat treatment or blade ride, but they understand a surface that has been brought patiently from black scale to brightness. Polish can also be deceptive. A bright bad pair remains bad, while a plain, well-fitted pair may serve faithfully for decades. Experienced buyers learn to open and close the tool, to test the tips, to feel for wobble. Shine draws the eye, but action tells the truth. This old lesson survives wherever tools are sold. Finish can invite trust, but only performance earns it. Testing is where politeness ends. A tool may look graceful, shine nicely, and open with a satisfying motion, but the test material is not sentimental. Thread, wool, linen, leather, hair, parchment, or kitchen herbs will reveal the truth according to the intended use. Before factories, each pair may receive more individual testing than later mass-made tools, not because the past was magically superior, but because variation demanded attention. The maker begins with simple cuts. A loose thread is held near the tips. If the tips fail, the finest decorative polish in the world becomes irrelevant. Then a scrap of cloth is cut closer to the pivot and along the length. The scissors should not push the fabric away. They should not leave uncut fibers. They should not require a heroic squeeze. A tailor's shears must run in a long, confident line. Small scissors must nip cleanly. Heavier shears must bite without twisting. Failures are sorted by feel. If the blades chew, perhaps the edges are dull or the ride is poor. If they bind, the pivot may be too tight or a high spot remains. If the cut begins well and fails near the tip, the crossing pressure may fade too soon. If the blades wobble, the screw or rivet needs attention. Each symptom points backward into the making, and the maker follows it like a trail through the day's work. Testing can be humbling. A nearly finished pair may return to the stone, the file, the vise, the pivot, and then back to the test scrap. The user will not care how close it came to being good. The user only knows whether it cuts. At last, the scissors pass through cloth with a soft, decisive sound. The maker may allow himself a small nod. Not celebration exactly. More like relief, folded neatly and set beside the finished tools. Testing materials may be kept near the bench precisely for this purpose. Linen scraps, wool threads, perhaps paper or leather, depending on the intended tool. The maker does not test randomly. He chooses materials that exaggerate likely faults. A fine thread at the tips exposes weakness there. A folded cloth tests strength and alignment. A long cut shows whether the blade line wanders. Sometimes the test is performed for the buyer, but often it is performed before the buyer ever appears. Reputation is easier to protect at the bench than to repair in the market. A pair that fails privately can be corrected quietly. A pair that fails in a customer's hand becomes a small public play in which the tool is the villain and the maker is somewhere off stage, losing future business. The test cut is sometimes repeated after oiling and wiping, because grit from finishing can hide in the joint or along the edge. A tool that cuts well once but poorly after a few movements is not ready. The maker wants consistency, not a lucky first snip. A dependable pair should behave the same way when the customer uses it tomorrow, not only when the maker is watching today. Different users ask different lives from scissors. The tailor wants long blades, a smooth ride, and enough weight to keep cloth steady without tiring the hand. The seamstress or embroiderer may prefer smaller points that can reach into thread and stitch. The barber needs careful edges near skin and hair, where dragging is felt immediately and remembered with irritation. In the kitchen, scissors may cut herbs, twine, small bones, or anything else a household hand decides is reasonable at the moment. Then there are shears for sheep, often shaped differently, sometimes with springy arms rather than finger bows. Their world smells of wool, lanolin, straw, weather, and impatient animals. They must cut thick fleece without failing, and they live a harder life than polite sewing scissors. The maker who produces them thinks less about elegance and more about endurance, leverage, and the rhythm of repeated opening and closing in a field or shearing shed. Barber's scissors occupy a more intimate space. Their action must be smooth and controlled. Hair is unforgiving in its own way. A rough edge bends it before cutting. A poor pivot makes the motion jerky. And because the tool moves near ears, cheeks, and necks, customers notice every hesitation. Tailors, meanwhile, may treat good shears almost as extensions of the hand. A fine pair stays on the bench, perhaps protected from children, apprentices, and anyone who thinks paper is harmless. Cutting paper can dull cloth shears, and this small domestic argument has probably existed for centuries in one form or another. So the scissor maker is not making one universal object. He is making answers to many daily problems. Each answer has blades, a pivot, and handles, but the proportions change with the work. The ordinary drawer may later mix them together, but the workshop knows their differences. The existence of different scissor types also means workshops may specialize. One maker becomes known for cloth shears, another for razors and barber's scissors, another for household goods. Specialization can sharpen skill, but also narrow it. A person who makes excellent heavy shears may not automatically make elegant embroidery scissors, just as a boat carpenter is not therefore a violin maker because both touch wood. Users teach these distinctions through wear. Tailor shears develop polished places from long table cuts. Kitchen shears suffer stains and abuse. Barber scissors are cleaned with a different concern. Sheep shears may show the marks of outdoor labor and quick sharpening. Each tool returns, if it returns, carrying evidence. The repair bench becomes an archive of use, and the maker reads it with more accuracy than many written records. Each trade also develops rules around ownership. Tailor's shears are not general household scissors. Barber's scissors are not for opening parcels. Sheep shears are not delicate sewing tools. These boundaries protect edges and livelihoods. When someone violates them, the damage may look small, but to the person who depends on the tool, it feels like disrespect made visible in steel. A good pair of scissors does not finish its story when it leaves the maker. It begins a second life in hands that use it, dull it, drop it, oil it, neglect it, praise it, and eventually bring it back for repair. Before factories made replacement easier and cheaper, repair was part of the natural life of tools. A pair that had cost real money deserved more than a quick burial in a rubbish heap. The common troubles are familiar. The edge grows dull. The pivot loosens. The blades develop a tiny gap, i.e., The tips are bent by a fall or by someone using scissors for a task that would have made the original maker stare silently into the middle distance. A screw may be lost. A rivet may wear. Rust may creep into the joint. None of these problems necessarily ends the tool. A grinder or cutler can resharpen the bevels, true the interfaces, adjust the ride, and tighten the pivot. If the points are damaged, they may be shortened and reshaped. The scissors become a little smaller, but still useful. If the bows are uncomfortable, rough places can be smoothed. If a screw is worn, a new one may be made or fitted. The repairer reads the old maker's work and the owner's habits at the same time. There is something gentle about this long life. The scissors carry scratches from years of cloth, faint stains from damp rooms, polished places where fingers have rested. Their value is not only in the steel but in familiarity. A tailor may know exactly how his shears open. A household may have one pair everyone reaches for first, and several others everyone avoids without quite saying why. Repair reminds us that pre-industrial objects often lived in a world of maintenance. Tools were not expected to remain perfect without care. They were expected to be brought back, adjusted, sharpened, and made useful again. The best scissors were not immortal. They were worth tending. Repair also creates a second economy around scissors. A traveling grinder may call through streets or villages, offering to sharpen knives and shears. A household brings out the tired pair that has been chewing thread all winter. The grinder's wheel sings for a moment, and the tool returns to service. Not every repair is perfect, and not every grinder is equally skilled, but the expectation of maintenance remains strong. There is comfort in imagining the same pair lasting through years of mending, seasons of cutting, perhaps even generations. Of course, many tools were lost, broken, or worn beyond saving. But the ones that survived often did so because people understood them as repairable. A screw could be adjusted. An edge could be restored. A point could be reshaped. Use did not immediately imply disposal. It implied care. Repair carries memory forward, but it also changes the object. A blade grows narrower with sharpening. A replaced screw may look different. A shortened tip alters reach. The tool remains itself and becomes a little new. Old objects often survive through such compromises. Their continuity is not perfect preservation, but faithful usefulness renewed piece by piece. When a finished pair is ready for sale, it enters another kind of workshop, the marketplace of reputation. Scissors may be sold directly by a maker, through a cutler, by a traveling merchant, at a market stall, or as part of a wider trade in knives, razors, needles, awls, and other small necessities. The buyer sees the shine and feels the movement. The maker hopes the buyer also senses the hidden hours. Good scissors are not cheap in a world where metal, fuel, skill, and time all cost something. A poor household may own one pair and guard it carefully. A tailor may invest in better shears because bad cutting wastes cloth, and cloth can be dearer than many modern imaginations allow. A barber's tools are part of his livelihood. A seamstress depends on points that cut cleanly without fraying thread. The purchase is practical, but it is also a small act of trust. The seller may demonstrate the cut on scraps. A strip of linen parts. A thread vanishes between the tips. The buyer opens and closes the pair, perhaps pretending to know more than they do, which is a tradition older than most technologies. Weight matters. Smoothness matters. The bows must fit the hand well enough. A stiff pair might loosen with use, or it might simply be stiff forever. Judgment is made in a few seconds, based on work that took hours or days. Maker's marks, regional reputations, and shop loyalties matter. Certain towns become known for cutlery. Certain families pass down skills. A mark stamped into steel can travel farther than the maker ever does. It can also be copied, because dishonesty has never required industrial machinery. At the stall or counter, the scissors look complete and self-contained. But around them gather miners, charcoal burners, smelters, merchants, smiths, grinders, finishers, repairers, and users. The little tool is a meeting place of many economies, small enough to hold in one hand. Packaging, when it existed, was simple compared with modern retail, but protection still mattered. Edges could be wrapped in cloth, paper, leather, or tied so they would not damage other goods. Fine points needed guarding. Rust had to be discouraged with oil. A merchant who allowed good scissors to rattle and corrode in transit was spending reputation carelessly. The customer might also ask where the scissors came from. Place names could carry value, especially when certain towns were associated with cutlery. The answer might be honest, exaggerated, or deliberately vague. Markets have always contained theater. Yet beneath the bargaining and claims, the tools still had to cut. A lie might sell one pair. Performance sold the next. In that sense, cloth and thread were better judges than advertisements. The sale of scissors is therefore a meeting between visible and invisible qualities. The buyer can see polish and shape, feel weight and motion, perhaps test a scrap. But steel quality, temper, future wear, and the honesty of the pivot reveal themselves over time. Buying a tool before factories often meant buying someone's reputation in advance and waiting for daily work to confirm it. The old workshop is often remembered through the master craftsman, but the real labor around scissors is wider and quieter than one name. Apprentices pump bellows, sort stock, sweep filings, carry water, turn wheels, hold lamps, fetch charcoal, and learn by being corrected. Women may use the finished tools in enormous quantities through sewing, mending, tailoring support, textile work, household management, and piecework, even when their names do not appear in the records of toolmaking. In some places and trades, women also participate in finishing, polishing, packing, selling, or auxiliary labor connected to cutlery production. Family workshops blur the neat lines that later histories like to draw. A child may know the sound of filing before knowing letters. A wife may manage accounts, customers, materials, or finishing tasks, while the formal credit rests elsewhere. The object in the hand contains social arrangements as well as steel. Apprenticeship is not romantic when lived from the apprentice's side. It is repetition, sore arms, small humiliations, and the long, slow acquisition of judgment. The first tasks are boring, because boring tasks are safer to give to beginners. Even so, a badly swept floor can hide a dropped screw. Poorly sorted blanks can waste a morning. Care begins with humble work. The users, too, shape the tool's history. The seamstress cutting by dim light knows whether the tips are trustworthy. The household worker mending shirts knows if the bows hurt after an hour. The tailor knows if the shears glide or fight. Their complaints return through markets and repairs. Their preferences influence the maker indirectly, through what sells, what comes back broken, and what earns praise. So when you imagine pre-industrial scissors, do not see only a single smith in heroic firelight. See the network of tired hands around him, visible, half visible, and nearly erased. Everyday tools are often made by communities of labor, then used by even larger communities of need. The invisibility of some labor is especially strong because scissors often serve textile work, and textile work filled countless hours of women's lives. Cutting fabric, trimming seams, clipping threads, opening old garments for reuse, preparing household repairs, these acts rarely look important one by one. Together, they are the maintenance of clothing, bedding, trade, and respectability. Poor cut wastes cloth. A clean cut saves time and material. So the tool sits at a crossing of gendered histories. Men may dominate many formal records of metalworking, while women dominate many daily uses that made the tool necessary. Apprentices and children occupy the margins, learning, carrying, helping, being scolded. The finished scissors do not announce any of this. They simply open and close. But if you listen closely, the hinge is crowded with lives. Invisible labor also includes the fatigue of repetition. Cutting, mending, and making are not single picturesque moments but hours. The same hand opens the blades again and again. The same apprentice files another surface. The same household worker trims another seam. History often notices inventions more readily than endurance, yet endurance is where everyday technology proves its worth. Scissors travel well. They are small, valuable, useful, and easy to tuck into a chest, basket, barber's roll, tailor's kit, sailor's belongings, or merchant's pack. Once made, a pair may leave the town of its birth and cut cloth in a place where no one knows the sound of the workshop that formed it. This is how humble tools carry local skill across distance. Trade moves scissors along with needles, knives, razors, thimbles, buckles, combs, and other small goods that make daily life work. A merchant may carry several qualities, from rough household shears to finer pieces meant for professional hands. Some are wrapped to protect edges. Some are oiled against rust. Some sit in a stall where customers test them under open sky, while dust, rain, and bargaining do their usual work. Travel changes the tool's meaning. In a rural village, one good pair may be borrowed among neighbors, sometimes willingly. In a port, scissors may serve sailmakers, rope workers, tailors, surgeons, cooks, and anyone repairing clothing far from home. In a wealthy household, specialized scissors multiply. Sewing scissors, candle snuffers, of a related cutting logic, embroidery scissors, kitchen shears, and more. In a poorer household, specialization collapses into one overworked pair. Because scissors are portable, they also become personal. They can be part of a dowry, a trade kit, a gift to an apprentice, a small inheritance, or a possession carried through migration. Their value may be modest compared with land or silver, but usefulness creates its own kind of attachment. A tool that solves a daily problem becomes hard to surrender. By the time a pair has crossed markets, roads, rivers, or seas, the maker may never hear of it again. Yet, each clean cut is a distant continuation of his work. The workshop travels inside the pivot. As scissors travel, they also meet different repair traditions. A screw fitted in one town may be replaced in another with whatever the local repairer can make. A broken tip may be reshaped according to local use. A pair brought by a sailor or migrant may outlive its original style, becoming a hybrid of maker's intent and owner's journey. Tools in motion also spread expectations. A tailor who has used excellent shears may become less patient with poor ones. A merchant who sells a successful type may order more, encouraging production far away. Small objects help standardize desire before machines standardize manufacture. People learn what a good cut feels like, then ask for it again. In this quiet way, a pair of scissors can influence work well beyond the bench where it was born. A traveling pair can also become evidence of contact between worlds. A local repairer may recognize foreign steel or an unfamiliar pattern. A user may prefer the imported pair and ask a nearby maker to imitate it. In this way, design spread not only through drawings or patents, but through objects handled, borrowed, admired, and copied by people who simply wanted better work. Factories did not make scissors simple. They made repetition faster, cheaper, and more uniform. Stamping, drop forging, machine grinding, standardized screws, gouges, jigs, and specialized production lines gradually changed both the object and the lives around it. The hand skills did not vanish in a single dramatic moment, but the balance shifted. What one small shop had fitted pair by pair could increasingly be divided, measured, and repeated at scale. For buyers, this brought advantages. Scissors became more affordable. Replacement became easier. A household might own several pairs instead of guarding one. Standard parts made repair or adjustment more predictable. Shops could offer sizes and types in greater quantity. The ordinary drawer began to fill. For workers, the story was more complicated. Factory production could reduce some forms of isolated hand labor while creating others: repetitive grinding, polishing, assembling, packing, inspecting. Skill did not disappear. It was redistributed, narrowed, timed, and supervised. The old maker who understood the whole pair from raw stock to final cut became less central in many places. A worker might spend long days perfecting one operation without ever owning the finished story. The scissors themselves changed in style and availability. Designs could be copied more consistently. Decorative forms could be produced for wider markets. Cheap scissors could be very useful, but also more disposable. The old repair culture weakened when buying new became easier than maintaining old. It is tempting to make factories either villains or heroes, but history is sleepier and more stubborn than that. Factories answered real needs and created real losses. They gave more people access to tools while thinning the intimate relationship between maker, object, and user. The pre-industrial pair remains interesting because it remembers a slower chain of responsibility, when every cut had passed through someone's judgment long before it reached cloth. Industrial production also changed time. In the small shop, a troublesome pair could occupy attention until corrected. In the factory, time was counted differently, divided among operations and wages. This did not eliminate pride, but it altered where pride could live. A worker might become extremely skilled at grinding one surface or assembling one pivot, while the complete identity of the pair belonged to the firm. For the customer, the difference might be invisible if the scissors cut well. That invisibility is part of industrial success. Yet the older method helps us appreciate what uniformity replaced, not only inefficiency, but judgment spread across the whole object. The pre-industrial maker knew the pair as a sequence of causes. Factories preserved many causes in machines, gauges, and routines, then hid them behind abundance. Factory abundance also changed emotional attachment. When scissors became cheaper, losing a pair became less serious. That was a genuine relief for many households. But lower cost can make care feel optional. The older pair, expensive enough to maintain and personal enough to guard, belonged to a slower material culture where ownership and responsibility sat closer together. If you reduce scissors to their simplest idea, they are a lesson in small engineering. Two levers cross at a pivot. Finger force becomes cutting force. The blades meet along a moving line. The handles invite the hand to repeat the motion. Nothing about this sounds mysterious, and yet making it work well in steel is full of quiet difficulty. The pivot divides each half into effort and work. Long handles and short blades give power. Long blades and shorter handles give reach and speed, but ask more from the hand. Heavy shears need enough leverage to cut thick material. Fine scissors need control near the tips. Every design chooses which inconvenience it prefers. The blades also need a slight set, a crossing pressure, so the edges remain in contact. Too much, and friction steals effort. Too little, and the material bends between them. The edge angle must suit the material. Cloth, hair, wool, paper, leather, and herbs do not behave alike. A pair made for one use may survive another, but not always happily. The bows translate human anatomy into metal. Fingers are not round rods. Hands differ. Work positions differ. A tailor cutting flat cloth uses a different motion from someone snipping thread in the air. The best pre-industrial maker may not have formal engineering language for all this, but he has observation, repair experience, and the persuasive complaints of customers. What makes scissors lovely is that the engineering hides inside familiarity. You do not think of levers when trimming a thread. You do not think of blade ride when opening a package. But the old maker had to think about them, even if in shop words rather than textbook words. The little tool is a compact treaty between physics and fingers. The physics of scissors also explains why children are often given blunt, loose, or awkward versions for safety, and why adults immediately notice how badly those cut. Safety and performance are in tension. Sharp edges, precise tips, and close blade contact make scissors useful and potentially dangerous. Rounded tips, loose pivots, and duller edges make them safer and more frustrating. The old maker of working tools usually leaned toward usefulness, because the buyer needed a tool, not a symbol of one. Even the sound of scissors expresses engineering. A clean pair gives a soft slicing whisper. A loose pair clicks and chatters. A dry pivot squeaks. A rough edge crunches through material it should glide through. Long before measuring instruments, makers and users diagnosed tools by sound. The ear became a workshop gauge, and annoyance became data. The engineering is also why scissors remain satisfying to watch. One hand motion produces two blades moving in opposition, a small controlled crossing that seems almost alive. The pivot converts squeeze into separation, pressure into neat division. The mechanism is simple enough for a child to understand and outline, and subtle enough for a craftsman to spend years improving. At the end of the working day, the scissor maker's bench is not clean in the modern sense. There are filings in corners, a film of black on tools, scraps of metal sorted by possible future usefulness, worn stones, oily rags, and the day's finished or half-finished pairs laid where they will not be knocked to the floor. The fire is lowered. The bellows rest. The shop exhales. A few pairs may be ready for sale. Others wait for sharpening, polishing, or another argument at the pivot. One troublesome pair sits apart, accused but not condemned. The maker knows he may solve it tomorrow with a small correction, or discover that the trouble began much earlier and cannot be charmed away. Craft often includes this quiet sleep of unfinished problems. The apprentice sweeps, but not carelessly. Small screws, rivets, and bits of usable metal must not be lost. Water is emptied or covered. Steel is oiled against damp. Tools return to places determined by habit rather than labels. In a shop like this, organization may look chaotic to a stranger, but feel perfectly legible to the person whose hands built the pattern. Outside, people are still using scissors made by someone, somewhere. A tailor trims a seam. A mother cuts cloth for a repair. A barber wipes blades after a customer. A shepherd hangs shears for the next day. The maker does not see these moments, but his work is present in them, opening and closing in other rooms. As lamplight shrinks, the finished scissors catch one last dull gleam. They are not grand. They will not be sung about by kings. They will simply cut, which is sometimes the highest ambition of an object. The day ends not with triumph, but with usefulness made ready. There may be accounts to settle at the end of the day as well. Charcoal used, steel remaining, a screw that must be made tomorrow, a customer's repair promised too soon, an apprentice's mistake quietly entered into the invisible ledger of teaching. Craft is romantic from a distance, but close up it includes deadlines, money, fatigue, and the need to make tomorrow possible. Still, there is satisfaction in lining up finished pairs. Each one represents a set of solved problems. Not perfectly solved, perhaps, but sufficiently solved to serve. The maker may open and close one more pair before putting it down, not because he doubts it, but because the motion is pleasing when it is right. The blades pass, the tips meet, and for a moment, the day's many irritations reduce to one small, clean, mechanical truth. The bench at night is a kind of ledger written in objects. Finished pairs record success. Half-finished blanks record intention. Failed pieces record tuition paid to experience. Tools left ready for morning record discipline. Nothing needs to be dramatic for the room to be full of meaning. Workplaces remember through arrangement, wear, and the small decisions that make tomorrow easier. Now the workshop grows quiet, and the story returns to the drawer where we began. A pair of scissors lies among thread, buttons, paper scraps, ribbon ends, receipts, and small household mysteries. It looks like a simple thing. 2 blades, 2 handles, 1 pivot dot. But inside that shape is the memory of ore and charcoal, heat and hammer, filing and grinding, water and temper colors, testing scraps, market stalls, repairs, and hands that learn by doing slowly. Before factories, scissors were not casual objects. They were small investments in control. Control over cloth, hair, wool, thread, paper, food, and the endless minor separations daily life requires. To cut cleanly is to make a decision visible. This piece remains, that piece is removed. This seam begins, that thread ends. The tool is modest, but the act is everywhere. The patient labor behind scissors also reminds us how much skill disappears into convenience. The better a tool works, the less we notice it. A poor pair makes itself famous through irritation. A good pair becomes invisible. It waits in the hand, obeys, and returns to silence. That invisibility is not emptiness. It is success. So if you ever pick up scissors and feel the smooth crossing of the blades, you can imagine the old maker testing that same motion by lamplight. You can imagine the tiny worry at the pivot, the careful brightening of an edge, the first strip of linen parting cleanly. You can imagine the apprentice sweeping filings from the floor, while the finished pair rests nearby, already on its way to becoming ordinary. And as the night settles, let the little tool close gently in your mind, not with a snap, but with a soft, precise whisper. Two blades meeting. A day's labor hidden. The drawer quiet again. The next time scissors disappear under papers or sink to the back of a drawer, they will still be carrying this long ancestry. Modern versions may come from machines, stainless alloys, molded handles, and global shipping, yet the old principles remain recognizable. Two blades must meet. The pivot must behave. The hand must not hate the handle. The material must part. That continuity is calming. Human beings have spent centuries improving small tools, not because small tools are trivial, but because life is made of small repeated acts. Cutting thread, trimming cloth, shaping hair, opening a packet, harvesting herbs, freeing a knot. These are ordinary gestures, and ordinary gestures deserve good tools. Before factories, achieving that goodness required patient eyes and tired hands. Remembering them makes the object a little less invisible, and the quiet drawer a little more full of history. So the quiet drawer is not the opposite of the forge. It is the forge destination. The heat, filing, grinding, and fitting were all performed so that one day the tool could wait silently among ordinary things. That silence is not a loss of importance. It is the final courtesy of good craft, to stand ready, ask little, and do the small necessary job when called.